Buenos dias. My name is Steven Youngblood. I'm the director of the Center for Global Peace Journalism at Park University in the Kansas City area, where I'm also an associate professor of communications. Today, I'm going to discuss U.S. media coverage of immigration. Specifically, U.S. media coverage of the so-called migrant caravan last year reflects traditional media coverage about immigrants and immigration. Let's look quickly at how traditional media narratives about immigration. These narratives can be seen in a previous incident in 2014 that was termed by the media a crisis. There was an increasing number of women and children from Central America crossing the US-Mexico border during the summer of 2014. During the first 8 months of 2014, about 47,000 children were detained by immigration authorities. The majority had humanitarian reasons for fleeing their home countries. How is this episode covered? A study done by Opportunity Agenda of the news coverage of this crisis for about 3 months analyzed randomly selected newspaper articles. They found several dominant metaphors were used by American media during their coverage of immigration issues generally and the 2014 crisis in particular. Researcher Lisa John writes, previous descriptions of the border use problematic immigrants as water metaphors. Our analysis finds that this imagery continues to be widely used when discussing the unaccompanied refugees fleeing harm and migrants in general. The articles consistently refer to flood, the influx, waves of immigrants, free-flowing, surging, and pouring over the US border. Moreover, Johns writes that passive language continues to frame migrants as criminals through the use of such words as sneaking across, apprehended, intercepted, detained, caught, turned over, and so on. These distorted narratives were repeated during the more recent coverage of the so-called migrant caravan in 2018. About a year ago, Donald Trump sparked an avalanche of coverage as he repeatedly warned about the threats posed by a caravan of 3,000 to 7,000 Central American migrants winding their way through Mexico. A study of news media reporting about the migrant caravan in Mexico using LexisNexis showed that negative mentions about the migrants outnumber positive ones, and that news media are guilty of exaggerating the threat posed by the migrants. In a study of news reports by the Center for Global Peace Journalism in October 2018, negative mentions more than doubled sympathetic ones in newspapers, while negative mentions outnumbered sympathetic ones by about 25% in broadcast transcripts. Negative mentions include terminology like surge, threat, flood, stream, criminals, illegals, and so on. Sympathetic terms included poor, asylum, hungry, dehydrated, sick, flee, refugee, and poverty. The study also shows that the media exaggerated the threat posed by the number of migrants. Much of the media engaged in hyperbole by using subjective labels like massive, enormous, and huge. These findings are consistent with previous research that indicated predominantly negative narratives about migrants, including framing of migrants as invaders and hype about the threat and the crisis. What impact do these distorted narratives have? Media researchers and professors Emily Ferris and Heather Mohammed write, evidence suggests that the Latino threat narrative adds hostility about immigration in the United States. Portraying teenage boys may reinforce the Trump administration's frequent effort to imply that Latino immigrants are overwhelmingly involved in MS-13 criminal gangs, while empathetic images of girls and toddlers do not fit with Trump's portrayal of immigrants as bad hombres. There is a better way, one using the approaches of peace journalism. Better reporting would have featured a majority of stories focused on the migrants themselves, especially women and girls. Better reporting would have muted the red-faced pundits and political opportunists on both sides. Why report the same hate, the same fear over and over? More responsible reporting about migrants would avoid spreading propaganda like that coming out of the White House. It would not use language that reinforces stereotypes, racism, sexism, or xenophobia. It would proactively report stories that debunk stereotypes and challenge exclusively negative narratives. All of these suggestions reflect key principles of peace journalism. In conclusion, whether real or politically created, there will be another migrant crisis. Perhaps next time the media can avoid being used as a political megaphone and instead report in a way that gives a more nuanced view of the situation and about those seeking refuge. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Please, could you help me to share my presentation to start my talk? In the meantime, buenos dias, San Diego, and good morning, Tijuana. My name is Cristina Avila Zesatti, and I am the founder of and current director of Peace Correspondent, which is a digital news media specialized on that so-called peace journalism. I'm Mexican, and I'm talking to you from Zacatecas. It's a north-centered city, which is famous for several things, but among other reasons, because my region has more citizens living in the United States than in our home. So trust me, I know what I'm talking about when we discuss about migration issues. I know about migration, actually about global migration, because I'm a journalist, and most of all, because I'm specialized in peaceful media coverages. As I know I don't have so much time to talk, so please let me tell you a typical Mexican story about nature, migration, and death. Can you please share the video in few minutes? I wanted to tell you that we are now in November, and each year during this season, thousands and thousands of monarch butterflies starts their travel from Canada to Mexico, to my country. They really need to make this trip in order to survive the winter. And curiously, the butterflies arrive just in time for the death celebration. We don't have my video. Okay, no presentation and no video, they are saying to me. I hope you can see this interesting video after my words, but I was trying to say that clearly we need to hear about how we are telling to our readers and to our followers about migration. Migration, finally, is part of nature, a living part of our planet. And could you imagine what could happen if one day human laws decide to stop the trips of birds, the flights of bees or butterflies, or forbid the travel of fishes in the sea? If one day, in the middle of our madness, we try to stop natural migration, we will die. And well, actually, that is exactly what is happening now. Our planet is dying. And while the earth is dying in front of our eyes, media are reproducing the hate speech of any kind of politicians instead of tell us the real and brave stories about thousands of human efforts to save life. And maybe we could think that hate speech among politicians narrative is something new, or maybe we could believe that fake news is a real new trending in media. But sadly, for those of us who work studying peace, war, conflicts, and solutions, we know very well that there is something very old in our history, called in Spanish, la construcción del enemigo, or in English, the build of enemy images. Obviously, as a result of this huge media narrative mistake, we find media descriptions like cartoons, photographs, and jokes, bad jokes. And thanks to that, our receptors and our readers ends by justifying the attacks, the persecutions, because they feel fear and they feel hate instead of have empathy or solidarity feelings. I always say that the lack of information on peace efforts makes a society more focused on problems. In Peace Correspondent, for example, what we try to do is precisely to tell the other side of the story. And what exactly is the other side? Well, we are now living in a time where our major and global challenge is what is happening with global warming. Global warming should be our principal preoccupation and occupation, not only because global warming is already causing more and more migration caravans from all around the world, but most of all because while we, the humans, still fighting against ourselves, the earth is yelling us, saying that she needs a time to rest. Fortunately, I think young people have this issue very clear. We have some very interesting young leaders trying to be heard, and I'm not talking about Greta only. We have, for example, demonstration in Israel and Palestine, where youth from both sides are now going on the streets together. We have Mexican and American young leaders doing art together and not building any stupid walls. We have young women from Germany traveling into the Italian Sea to save African migrants. We have indigenous people in Amazonia, from Brazil, from Colombia, from Bolivia, trying to save their territories. We have actually plenty stories to tell about positive migration agreements among people without borders, people who is not focused in our problems, but in the solution of them. And personally, as when I founded this peaceful media 10 years ago, even yet today, I still wondering why media are not telling us more about all these people, all these efforts, all this solution story. We must understand narrative is all for human beings. We believe in myths, we believe in religions, we believe in politicians, and we believe in media. We build our daily routine from narrative that we hear. We build all days from this narrative, and media have a huge task in order to really make that the entire humanity understand that migration nature is death. It's a narrative that we now end at this time. Nature is migration, and we have to learn this lesson. My point is, just to final my presentation, my point is human beings are made to believe, but what we are believing now? We're still fighting for frontiers, but media have to tell us now that probably very soon we will have no frontiers at all, thanks to the destructions that we are doing on Earth. The frontiers are a narrative that must disappear if we really want to save our planet and our lives. Thanks.